This is the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, Lord.
6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, to the home of Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. There they gave a dinner for him. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those at the table with him. Mary took a pound of costly perfume made of pure nard, anointed Jesus' feet, and wiped them with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, the one who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor?" He said this, not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. He kept the common purse and used to steal what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone, so she might keep it for the day of my burial. You always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
So this is a story about an anointing. An anointing, which is a peculiar word. Anointing is not something we get to participate in much. Not many of us ever go to an anointing. But in the time of Jesus, anointing was something that was much more common. In the ancient world, it was a common practice. And in fact, there were two main reasons, two main occasions that called for anointing. The first was when someone was becoming the king or the ruler. When it was time for someone to take on the role of the king, there would usually be some sort of ceremony where the king was anointed. You can picture this, can't you? It happens in the Bible from time to time. Imagine the prophet Samuel, and there before him is the young boy David. And Samuel pours oil over the head of David, and by doing this declares that the Lord is choosing him, anointing him to be king over God's people. Anointing is what you do for a king. Or, the second occasion is when someone dies and must be buried. Burial practices were much different then than they are now, but we have a little bit of a sense of this, don't we? Of the ways that people anointed the body of one who had died and was ready to be buried. This is what happens at the end of the story of Jesus, after all. When Jesus died, it was on the Sabbath day, and they did not have a chance to anoint the body. So early, on the first day of the week, the women went with their spices to the tomb to do just that. Anointing is what you do for burial. So in this story, as told in the 12th chapter of John, Mary, the friend of Jesus, sister of Lazarus and Martha, anoints Jesus. Mary takes some precious perfume and anoints the feet of Jesus. And what do you suppose is the purpose of this anointing? What's the occasion, so to speak? Is this an anointing of a king? Or is this an anointing for a burial? Well, before we answer that, let's step back for a second and consider, where is John chapter 12 in the overall story of the life of Jesus? This story comes near the end of the story of Jesus. This passage begins by saying it was 6 days before the Passover. And it's talking about the Passover, the big one. The one where Jesus will share a final meal with his disciples, then be betrayed and arrested and killed. The plot is thick at this moment, you see, for Jesus and for his disciples. Jesus has already done all the amazing stuff, the teachings and the signs. All these things that Jesus has done has pointed to one obvious truth, that he is the Son of God, the Holy One of God, the chosen King of God. All this led Jesus to this moment. And where will the story go from here? Well, it will go toward the cross, toward suffering and death. Jesus says of the costly perfume that Mary uses, she saved it for the day of my burial. And when we hear this, at first it may not make sense. She didn't save it for the day of your burial, Jesus. She's using it right now. But then we realize the burial of Jesus is beginning now in this moment. For the moment this story is done, Jesus will ride into Jerusalem and begin that purposeful walk to complete his work all the way to the tomb. Which brings us back to our question. Which is it, do you think? When Mary anoints the feet of Jesus, is this the anointing of a king? Or is this the anointing of one about to be buried? Well, we know the answer, don't we? It's both. It's both. It's not clear Mary knew the depths of meaning of her actions, but we know that Jesus will be the suffering Lord, that he will reign from the cross, that he will be a buried king. There's a word we use sometimes, a Bible word that captures this reality a bit, and that's the word Messiah. Do you know what Messiah means? The actual meaning of the word Messiah is the anointed one. The anointed one. That's what it means to say Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ. It means he is the anointed one, anointed by God. And today we remember that God anointed Jesus to be both king and suffering servant of all. And so in Mary, her act of giving and devotion to Jesus, we see a way of responding to the one who is this suffering king. We see a model for our own way of gathering close to worship the Lord. The weeks ahead will give us many opportunities to do that. Beginning next Sunday, we will hear once again the great drama as it unfolds in the stories of Holy Week and Easter. Listen, it was 6 days before the Passover. Jesus gathered for a dinner. They were all there. Those who believed in him, those who loved him, those who would betray him, those who would flee at the sight of danger. And we will be there too, to behold the Lord's anointed one, Christ the King, Jesus the buried and risen Lord.